activities that we do, engaging the community, bringing experts, resources, and connecting them with the city, partnering. We have a partnership with Facebook, the largest employer in Menlo Park. So that is Menlo Spark. And now a little bit about Peninsula Advanced Energy Communities. This is a California Energy Commission funded project. And you can see the little logo cloud here. We have a lot of partners and collaborators. We're very happy to have the transit districts, school districts, various other technical collaborators, as well as 4 southern San Mateo County cities, Menlo Park, where we're based, as well as East Palo Alto, Atherton, and Redwood City. And then we also have the city of Palo Alto on board advising us. They are not part of the grant, but they've done a lot in the space of clean energy measures. So moving on. And here are a couple of components of the PEA project. It covers a lot of ground, and I'm going to focus on best clean energy practices for cities, but the Peninsula Advanced Energy Communities project has a lot of other components, and we can share the links for these projects looking at streamlining permits and codes for local ordinances, financial assistance and financial models that work best, streamlining grid connections, solar emergency microgrids, energy storage. There's an EV charging master plan. And there's also a master plan for an AIC, an Advanced Energy Community Project. It's the Atherton Civic Center, and I'll touch upon that a little bit as we go. Okay, so this is just images of the 2 done as part of the Pea Collaborative. One is focused on the best practices. I'm going to spend the most time there and just give you sort of the best of the best. And then I also want to touch on gap analysis, which looked at what are the best practices that are currently happening in San Mateo County and focusing on the southern county cities that we're partnered with. And then where's there room for improvement? And I think that there are a lot of similarities between San Mateo County cities. Yes, it's Silicon Valley, but so it is fairly affluent, but we do have a lot of diversity, and we think that there is a lot that can be transferred to other cities outside the area. Okay, so looking at best practices, we did a survey covering clean energy measures that cities and municipal governments are taking in 5 categories: renewable energy, energy efficiency, zero net energy, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and then there's a 5th category, kind of a catch-all, other interesting measures, and I'll give you some examples as we go. We sort of looked outward in concentric circles, working from Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, California, out across the US, and then we did find a couple of really interesting European examples as well. We looked at sort of an all of the above approach, including policies, ordinances, initiatives, reach codes, of course, zoning code, building and energy codes, permitting, and then new and novel technology programs and pilots. See, I covered that. So just a sampling of what the report looks like and how it's organized, and I'll provide a link at the end so that you can download it if you're interested. What we did is we summarized what we found as the best practices across cities in these 5 categories that I mentioned, and then we sort of bucketed them out into measures that could be done as a city ordinance, so involving legal code, and then additional measures that couldn't exactly be adopted legislatively, but were interesting programs that were worth further investigation. Okay, so getting into some of those best practices, and I'm going to try to cover these really quickly. There are a lot of measures that we looked at. I'm just going to give some highlights, and then if folks are interested, hopefully you can find a little more information within the report. And then, of course, the report has a lot of citations and resources for further information. Okay, so on renewable, solar rooftop ordinances proved to be extremely popular. And we found so many measures that we sort of stopped counting. However, we did not focus on solar rooftop ordinances because we're finding that the grid power is becoming so clean. There's so much renewable power coming online through the grid, through community choice energy and other programs, that we wanted to look at other novel approaches that could make a bigger difference. And two that we found that were noteworthy were solar carports in Palo Alto. This is required. And a special financing package that's called Pay As You Save. And real quick on solar carports, this was an RFP that was issued by the city of Palo Alto where companies could bid for the rights to develop solar carports on city-owned parking lots and lease the space. And the reason we think it's so exciting is because the cities don't pay any money to do this. They collect money from the private sector for the right to develop on city parking lots, and then the community gets the benefit of the added resilience because the solar installations are coupled with energy storage and in some cases also EV charging. So these are great infrastructure projects that are low cost for the cities. It just really involves legal expertise with the contracting. And also no cost to maintain because the private sector, the company that has the winning bid, is responsible for maintaining the equipment into the future. So focusing on Pay As You Save for a moment, we think that this is a game changer. This is an on-bill financing tool that enables all utility customers, whether you're a homeowner, a business owner, or a renter, to install the most cost-effective energy efficiency upgrades and including renewable energy. So there are some on-bill financing tools right now available by PG&E. There are limitations on the amount that can be borrowed. There are limits to public awareness. We find that most people are unaware of the on-bill financing tools. And also, I'm not sure that the current tools allow financing of solar or renewable energy technology. And so Pay As You Save is a nice model because it integrates energy efficiency and renewable projects together. And the customers net out a savings on their monthly bill and the financing through their utility, so they don't need to mess with loans or other paperwork. So it's streamlined. Okay, moving on to energy efficiency. We did not spend a lot of time looking at energy efficiency for new buildings because California's Title 24 energy code is so stringent. It's approaching net zero energy, and we're finding that REACH codes are not very cost effective as the code gets more and more efficient, approaching zero. So looking at existing buildings, a couple of measures that cities are doing stood out as really exemplary. Point of sale energy audits and disclosures like that done in Austin and Berkeley seem very promising, although politically slightly challenging, so I won't focus too much on those. Deep energy retrofits we think are an extremely promising area. We think a couple of the example programs are truly a game changer. One in particular is New York City's Retrofit Accelerator program. The reason we think these are a game changer is because in areas like San Mateo County, where most of the areas built out, we are not seeing a lot of growth in new housing versus tear down rebuilds. Deep energy retrofits are promising. We have a lot of older apartment buildings, multifamily, serving low-income households where people are paying enormous utility bills. So there's sort of an equity issue there as well. The thing that makes the New York City Retrofit Accelerator program special and one worth potentially emulating here in California is that it couples free technical assistance with free financing assistance. That doesn't mean that they pay for all of the upgrades. It means they do a lot of handholding with property owners to help them through the various financing opportunities and sort of streamline that. And so there's a lot of staff support, and that has allowed them to launch about 500 different projects in the space of just a few years. So, they've moved forward very quickly. Okay, so getting into zero net energy, we found a couple of programs of note here, had a hard time deciding which were the game changers. So I'm going to talk about three game changers. The first was a zoning code update that happened here in Menlo Park, where I work. The area of Menlo Park that is developing the most rapidly around Facebook's campus was up for new zoning and a general plan update. And we thought that was an opportunity with new high-tech businesses coming in to really try to implement state-of-the-art green building code. And so at the end of 2016, Menlo Park adopted this new zoning code that requires 100% renewable energy buildings. And there's flexibility in the way that you reach 100% renewable energy, but really it was a way to reorient the city to say, we welcome development, but we don't welcome the carbon emissions that come with it. And so if you build here in Menlo Park in the Bayfront, the new zoning code will require essentially carbon-free buildings, and you can choose which renewable energy program you'd like to do. If you want to build the renewable energy on site entirely, or a portion of it with some in the community, or utilize some of the green energy programs through PG&E or community choice. But the novel part about the renewable energy requirement is that it encompasses both electricity and energy. And so it is possible now to build with natural gas in Menlo Park, but you'll have to pay for offsets for the carbon emissions. And so that's sort of a price signal to push developers into all electric carbon-free buildings. And we're really excited about working with other cities to implement similar zoning approaches. Two other really interesting approaches from the city of Watsonville and from New York City that I want to note. One is a climate impact fee. And this is another way to send a price signal to developers. If new developments are built to zero net energy standards, the climate impact fee is totally rebated. And the fee is levied in a way so that it sort of scales with the development size so that smaller developments aren't overly burdened. But essentially it sets up a revenue stream so that cities can collect additional fees, maybe about 20 or 30% on top of regular permitting fees. And that revenue is held in a carbon mitigation fund to be used for other projects of interest to the city. So that's a really interesting setup, especially for cities that need the revenue to run programs like deep energy retrofits for existing buildings. The last program of note is a Dutch program called Energize Fresno that looks at the existing built environment, and they've created this modular Lego-like approach to building in the insulation around the existing structure and creating zero net energy buildings, just working with the current footprint of that building. And that was recently imported to New York City. NYSERDA has a couple of projects that they're working on, and they're focusing on multifamily there, again, to try to get at some of the equity issues that I mentioned, helping low-income families kind of benefit from the newer technology. All right, so moving into electric vehicles. Our grant really covered charging infrastructure only, but I want to just note the high EV uptake rates in California and how that really gives us both an opportunity and a challenge to provide sufficient public charging infrastructure to support the growth in EVs. This slide was taken from an ICCT report. Actually, I think that there was a newer version of this report showing even higher rates, pushing 15, and in some communities getting up to 18% of new vehicles being EVs in Silicon Valley. So you can see that the US average is low, the California average is higher on the EV uptake, and then Silicon Valley cities are really kind of pushing the envelope. And we want to keep encouraging that with more and more EV charging infrastructure and visibility to EVs. So there are 4 areas where we thought that infrastructure could improve, and we pulled example cities that have done a great job. On city ordinances and zoning, the cities of San Francisco, Oakland, and Fremont in the Bay Area have recently adopted new standards for new development that essentially require almost all new parking spaces to be pre-wired or have the electrical capacity on hand. If in the next 10, 20 years we really see a dramatic increase in EVs, we don't want to see newish buildings having to tear out the infrastructure and rewire. And so I would say the San Francisco ordinance is probably the best model. And then in Palo Alto, there's an ordinance that requires 1 EV charger per residential unit for multifamily. So that's another great model to look at. Let's see, I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over some of these and just direct you to our report for other ideas on how to advance EV charging infrastructure. And then I'll note, in terms of advancing deployment of EVs themselves, our report did not focus on that, but we did work with Plug in America and other local stakeholders to hold a charrette last June to talk about what are the big game changers that we need to focus on to really advance EV deployment. And there's a white paper coming out shortly that will focus on both awareness campaigns and what we call butts and seats. So that's like test drive opportunities and opportunities for the general public to get more familiar with electric cars. And then also increasing the incentives, making the rebates instant. So when you're at the car lot, feeling the rebate off the top of the sale price might go a long way in really helping people make better decisions on the car lot. A couple of other best practices that I want to highlight that were in those first four categories. We have a long list, and here again, I'll direct you to the report for further information on some of these additional programs. I will note that the City of Portland has a really interesting in water pipe hydro renewable technology that they've deployed, working with a company called Lucid Technology. This is kind of a new and I would say under-tapped renewable energy technology. And the nice upside about it is that it's not intermittent. As long as water's flowing through the water mains under streets, it's generating electricity. So that's one to watch. The most exciting one for California that I want to draw your attention to is called whole home electrification. It's done by the City of Boulder, Colorado, and financed through their they have a carbon tax in Boulder. We think that it could be financed here in California through community choice energy programs or potentially also energy watch programs at the county level. The really nice thing about the whole home electrification project in Boulder is that they're doing a lot of hand-holding. They're identifying households that could really benefit from replacement of their water heater, their furnace, looking at installing EV charging technology and upgrading their electrical circuits all at once so that they can kind of get an economy of scale as they're doing all these upgrades and finance them together, bundled, so that they're netting out a monthly savings on their utility bill. And so far they've done, I would say, probably upwards of 50 different households, and they have different variations. You don't have to combine, you don't have to go 100% electric in your household at once. You can choose the elements that work for your family. So having that flexibility, I think, is key to the success of that program, and it's worth watching. It's pretty new. Okay. I see that I'm going short on time, so real quickly, I'm going to talk about the gap analysis, what California cities can do. The cities that we looked at, Atherton, East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Redwood City, as well as San Mateo County, they've already implemented so many programs. And so focusing on the areas that are sort of ripe for improvement, we found a couple of things that were of note and probably relevant to so many other California cities. One thing that we found is that the region is comprised primarily of older buildings that are not very efficient and can be really tricky to upgrade. And so the deep energy retrofit programs that I mentioned earlier would be a smart way to go and perhaps could be coordinated through the county for all of the smaller cities. We also found that San Mateo County is a collection of very small cities with very limited staffing. And so approaches like what the City of Palo Alto did with their solar carport project, doing an RFP, a call for projects, and having independent third parties work, that approach would seem to work well for small cities to really advance their clean energy measures. Let's see, just a couple of measures I want to go through quickly that are worth highlighting. The County of San Mateo launched Peninsula Clean Energy, Community Choice Energy Agency in October of 2016. We think CCEs offer a lot of promise to coordinate and really advance a lot of the clean energy measures that we're talking about. In Atherton, they are working on a civic center rebuild that sort of embodies all of these advanced energy community measures that we really want to showcase. It will be zero net energy, it will be fossil fuel free, it will showcase energy storage, ample electric charging, renewables, and I think it's a nice way to pull those together and show how a project can save money over time, build more efficient. Let's see, East Palo Alto, that city has fairly high poverty rates and I think struggles a little bit to be a leader on energy efficiency, but the city does have a climate action plan and cares very much. And so we are looking at a phase 2 for the PAIC project, really assisting East Palo Alto in advancing EV infrastructure, renewable technology, and potentially solar microgrids at a couple of the schools in the particularly disadvantaged communities. In Menlo Park, I talked to you a little bit about the zoning requirements. One thing I want to add is that the new zoning not just requires 100% renewable energy for each new development. Each development also has to go through and do an on-site renewable feasibility study to figure out what is the maximum renewable generation potential on that site. And then they have to install at least 30% of the maximum feasible renewables. So it's sort of a nudge. And we think once a property owner is going to do 30%, that they'll wind up building a whole lot more. And we are definitely seeing that with Facebook and the other major bioscience developer in the area, that there's substantial interest. But it's helpful to have it nailed down in the actual legal code. And lastly, they have to do building energy monitoring through EPA's Energy Star program. And this is a way to just benchmark and make sure if they're developing zero net energy buildings, that those buildings perform as they're built into the future. And if they don't, that we take corrective action. Okay, one last city I want to highlight, and then I'll move into the model ordinances work that we've done. In Redwood City, that city also used a third-party approach, working with a private company to install EV charging at some of their libraries. And what they did is they took advantage of the institutional peak demand charges that they're paying to couple the EV charging with solar as well as energy storage. The energy storage allows them to kind of shave their peak demand and save a lot of money. The city managed to save about $7,000 a year with this project. That sounds like very little, but they, in the process, got this wonderful infrastructure at their libraries with the EV charging, the storage, and the renewable generation. So that approach is really shown to be a win-win. It doesn't work for every city. It depends on the energy rate structure that you're on, and whether you're paying peak demand charges and how high those are. But we are seeing measures like that spreading, and it's a smart way to get that infrastructure at no cost. So PAIC is developing some model ordinances to spread to other cities and make it easy for cities to work together to implement some of these best practices. 3 of the 4 model ordinances that we're working on relate to electric vehicles and supporting the charging infrastructure. So cost sharing with multifamily buildings, getting more DC fast chargers at retail and high transit locations, and then the solar carports that I mentioned, just streamlining the process to institute those. The last model ordinance has to do with renewable space and water heating. This is a really important step to take to decarbonize buildings. As water heaters and HVAC systems need to be replaced, we want to make sure that the models that are selected are electric instead of natural gas. The newer electric models are extremely high efficiency and can really help save. And the one note on this model ordinance is that we do need the California Energy Commission approval. We need to submit an application with cost effectiveness studies proving that this pencils out. And so that work is underway, but it can take a fair amount of time. And we hope that we'll have model ordinances approved on this by next year. We think that coupling renewable space and water heating with rooftop solar can really cut down the price and make it worthwhile. And so that's one to watch. In closing, I would say it's easy to get lost in the many measures that we have it's kind of a laundry list of best practices, and sometimes it's kind of hard to figure out, where do we start? And for every city, that's to be different, but we hope that some of the highlights here can serve as, almost like a menu for cities, whether it's pay-as-you-save financing or deep energy retrofits or solar carports. All of these are a great starting place, and we hope that these reports can be a great resource for you. And I think in the interest of time, maybe we want to take questions at the end, but Carrie, I'll defer to you on that.
Yeah, we have a few minutes here. I just have one question right now. I think it's a really important question, and thank you, Diane. That was a really great presentation. I think you covered a lot in the small amount of time that I gave you. Actually, we have another question coming in, but I'll go with this first one. So can you comment on, generating political will, councils, board supervisors to kind of provide leadership for some of these efforts?
Yes, that's a great question. And that's really the role, one of the roles that we play. Menlo Spark being an advocacy group or a nonprofit, and and we work to drum up interest in the community on some of these measures. It's really hard. I think I'll just give one example. When the city of Menlo Park was updating the zoning code and the general plan, they heard a lot of concern from developers. Why do they have to go green? The state code is already really strict. Why is Menlo Park making it difficult for them? And of course, we can provide all the technical answers like, well, if you build electric, you can actually save money. There are all these studies, look at UC Berkeley or the UC system. But ultimately, it is a question of political will. We can throw all the facts at a city council that we want, but they have to answer to developers and other stakeholders who can sometimes have more of an emotional response of not wanting to change the way they're doing things. And so groups like ours are trying really hard to turn out interested community members and then other allied groups to support these green measures. And we have found that there's sort of a tipping point, and obviously it depends on the specific measure or issue and how much ire a city feels from a certain group of stakeholders. But we have found a tipping point. If you can turn out 10 really high quality speakers at a planning commission meeting or a city council meeting, it can make a difference. If you can have individual meetings with council members and key staff members, and also key members of the development community, business community, become a member of the Chamber of Commerce. If you can do the prep work of alerting people to these, those key decision makers to these issues and kind of taking their feedback and working with them, we have found that to be really helpful because overcoming developer pushback is tough. And, probably everyone on the line knows that. And their feedback is important. We certainly learned a lot from one of the bioscience developers, for example, in Menlo Park, that we did need to kind of tweak the approach. The city was calling for 100% of renewable energy to be required on site, and they heard heavy pushback, and they modified. We helped them modify their response. Excellent.
Couple more questions, and I think we do have time here. Might cut in a little bit to Neil, but I'm sure he's okay. So do you have a timeline for the creation of the EV model ordinance, the solar carports, existing multifamily, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Sorry, what is the timeline to develop that?
Yeah, the EV model ordinance.
So the model ordinances, the actual ordinance language is public. It can be taken and used. We have been talking to San Mateo County and cities. Is anyone interested in working with that ordinance? It is tricky for San Mateo County. We were hoping they could take the lead, and that hasn't happened because the county governs the unincorporated areas, which tend to be lower income areas. And I think it's really tricky to try to adopt like a cutting edge ordinance in those areas first. And so, right. With the city of Menlo Park, where I work, already has similar policy underway. So we're looking for, if anyone works for a city on this webinar is interested in advancing that, let's talk afterwards. But we don't have a taker yet to advance that.
Okay. And another question here, what have you seen as your top three, barriers as far as the fuel switching that you mentioned in your last slide?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think there's a little bit of like a bureaucratic inertia that a lot of agencies and institutions feel like natural gas is a clean fuel, and haven't quite caught up to the fact that the electric technology is way cleaner and cheaper and more efficient. So there's sort of an education component. And then, yeah, I think that there's just a lag between when the technology is available and when people realize, oh, hey, I can get an electric water heater at Home Depot, and you know, that would make more sense. But right now, the permitting is a little tricky too, so I would say that's a barrier.
Yeah, I would add too, based on that question, I know there's a couple of items in the legislature that went through to actually, I think, change some of the CPUC programs to give more of an incentive for, you know, heat pump water heaters and electrification of households as far as building codes are concerned. So I'll actually share that out maybe in addition to this presentation, since it was, I think it's somewhat very related.
That would be fantastic. Yeah, there is a suite of bills this year to help remove barriers at the state level to building decarbonization. And so, Carrie, I can work with you and coordinate on those resources. Excellent.
So I don't want to cut in too much more. We have a few more questions, but I'll have to triage here. So have you seen the climate fee implemented? And I think that was probably related to the one you may have, I think we had mentioned a few climate fees here, but have you seen them implemented at the county level or any state proposed bills? I can't say I've seen any bills talking about that, but maybe you have.
No, I haven't. I'd be really interested if anyone has seen that. The city of Watsonville has the climate fee, which is a development fee, and then the city of Boulder has their carbon tax. I don't know of any countywide or statewide efforts, although they could be underway, and we'd certainly welcome that.
Okay. Excuse me. I'll table these next two questions here, but I'll follow up with you, Diane, and forward these to you so we can make sure we get everything answered. But I'm going to transition to Neil Matouka and the Energize Fresno project, so we can learn a little bit more. Oh yeah, thank you very much, Dan. This is a really great presentation. I really appreciate that. So let's switch over. All right, Neil, you should be getting that right now.
All right. Well, thank you, Carrie. Let's see.
Yeah, that's good on my end.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Diane. That was a very interesting presentation. I think there's a lot to be learned there. Well, welcome. My name is Neil Matouka. I am a project manager at the Local Government Commission. I work with Carrie. And over the past 18 months, we have been working on our Energize Fresno project, LGC being the main recipient of the grant for this program. Let's see. Our partners on Energize Fresno are the City of Fresno, Fresno Metro Ministry, Tierra Resource Consultants, and CalStart. And we are similarly a California Energy Commission EPIC grant funded project. We received $1.5 million for this first phase, which is a planning phase. Talk about this a little bit later, but there's a second phase that we will be applying for that would be for implementation of everything I'm about to show you. But what are we trying to do? The CEC is very interested in advanced energy communities, as you saw in the previous slides and probably have been hearing. They have their own definition of an advanced energy community, which relies on these 9 points that you see on the screen. Basically, it boils down to an advanced energy community is a community that employs technologies and strategies to improve electrical grid reliability and resiliency, increase deployment of energy efficiency, renewable energy, smart grid, and zero net energy technologies. And from our perspective, We saw that CEC was interested in an approach that would scale and accelerate the deployment of AECs across the state. They view this as a critical component to the achievement of California's clean energy and energy resiliency goals, as well as making sure that the benefits of these advanced technologies are equitably spread throughout the state and reach those who need them the most. So why Fresno? Fresno is a city of rich cultural, ethnic, and linguistic diversity that has really been shaped by decades of unlimited sprawl, which contributed to inequitable and disinvested neighborhoods and districts. They are a major economic hub for the Central Valley and an important political and cultural center for the region. But Fresno has struggled for decades with some of the most severe environmental burdens in the state, as well as chronic poverty and underemployment. What you see on the left-hand side of the screen is a CalEnviro screen, which I would assume many of you are familiar with. And basically, the important point here, when you look at this image, is that much of Fresno is red. Red in this instance is bad. It indicates that Fresno, these neighborhoods and census tracts are in the upper tiers of environmental and economic burden. Combined with the image you see on the right-hand side of the screen, which the lines are transmission lines from PG&E. Again, red is not a color we want to see on here. This indicates that those are at capacity. So between the two of these graphs or images, what we really see is that Fresno has need for advanced energy technologies. They have need for generation, but that has to be done in a thoughtful and holistic manner because the grid is already at capacity, and therefore there needs to be mitigating technologies, or it will cause further damage when we try and help. And that's where Energize Fresno came in. Again, this is a pilot project. We worked with the city and numerous other stakeholders. And we think that our process, while coming up with a unique product for Fresno, consists of a number of key pieces that make it replicable and that really will contribute to its success. The first is that we took a holistic approach to building this plan for Fresno. And that included starting with a rolling portfolio of projects. So this is not a one-time selection of projects, but rather we have selected the most relevant and current projects, and they are backed by a whole, in our case, a spreadsheet of more projects that are ready to go as soon as their timeline fits in place or there's additional funding. Our plans and projects align with local and state policies, both from when you look at our economic opportunity zone, which is this red section on the map. That was based on the city and community's desire to continue building infill in downtown and focus development and infrastructure upgrades on downtown and the Blackstone corridor, including high-speed rail and the new bus rapid transit system. We have robust stakeholder engagement and have engaged with community organizations, the city, and our own project members to make sure that we are trying to get the best possible benefit for the entire community, not just for those who happen to have a large project. We are additionally making sure that our resource savings are as comprehensive and as deep as possible. This is both from making individual projects viable, but also, again, making sure they are future-proof and that the benefits spill over into the community as much as possible while not wasting any money. And our last piece is we're looking at new funding sources and funding aggregation, which would allow for the development of this type of holistic portfolio, and again, getting at those larger community benefits that are only available when done at scale. Speaking of our portfolio, the Energize Fresno portfolio has an average portfolio-wide payback period of 7 years, with implementation estimated to cost a total of $31.5 million and save participants $4.6 million in annual energy cost savings. The portfolio would also provide 7,340 metric tons of CO2 equivalent in annual greenhouse gas reductions, with emissions of about 1,500 passenger vehicles per year. We would see 26.6 gigawatt hours of annual electricity savings from energy efficiency upgrades and on-site generation, which is the equivalent of about just under 3,000 homes a year. What we were not as easily able to quantify was there will also be community scale demand response, which will come through aggregated battery capacity on our commercial projects and efficiency on demand from smart thermostats through residential programs. One of the first major areas in terms of our project portfolio are our development sites, which those are 13 commercial and mixed use buildings. An estimated cost of about $7.4 million, of which our phase 2 grant contribution would be $3.3 million. Similar to the development sites, but larger in scale, we're looking at what we call activity centers. So those would be City of Fresno municipal operations and Fresno City College. Again, estimated cost of about $17.7 million, and we would be contributing just under $3 million in potential phase 2 grant funding. The technologies for both of these types of developments, the development sites and the activity centers, would be very similar. We'd be looking at energy efficiency upgrades, primarily through lighting upgrades, advanced HVAC systems, building energy management systems, and those would be combined with a solar and battery system that provides energy to reduce the electrical consumption of the individual buildings. The batteries would help offset demand charges, and with the batteries at so many different sites throughout the downtown and Blackstone corridor, this is really what would give us the bulk of our demand response capability and potentially provide that community benefit of responding to those demand response events while they are also getting paid for that service. Our third major category is program enhancements. Fresno has the home energy tune-up and business energy tune-up, which provide energy efficiency upgrades to, respectively, to residential homes, low-income residential, and to small businesses. Those are currently, as I said, energy efficiency, minor energy efficiency, and we would be looking to bulk those up a little bit with some direct install smart thermostats, increased direct install weatherization, and an online or mobile energy management system that allows the interaction with the customer to their smart thermostat or other devices. And this would serve a number of functions. One, with the smart thermostat, we're hoping that there would be instant savings from the ability to better program, detect when people are home and need to have that space conditioned. The ability to respond to demand response events and get paid for that as well. But you'd also then have a direct source of information through the app or through these devices that would allow for customers to know when their appliances are not performing correctly, or when they're eligible for new incentives or new rebates to, say, replace old appliances or participate in new programs. Our last piece is electrification of transportation. We designed a system based on a different epic study done by PG&E. that they selected the charging needs or sites that fit the charging profile of future transportation demand in Fresno. They did it for the entire state of California, and we're looking at Fresno. So within our energy opportunity zone, we chose to design a system that deploys 20 DC fast chargers, primarily in downtown, as well as 5 autonomous solar-powered EV arcs, and those are primarily up the Blackstone corridor. And what does this mean for Fresno? Really, this is that residents see lower energy bills through increased energy efficiency and access to smart or interactive technologies. They, at a certain point, will see less pollution. They should have higher home values, and they should be more comfortable in their homes. They should be able to run the air conditioner during the summer. Local businesses will also see lower energy bills, and they'll really be able to better manage their energy use, their consumption, and again, there's a huge opportunity for making sure that their appliances are in good working order that comes through the energy monitoring. Developers will similarly see lower energy bills, but we're anticipating that they would also see higher rent and a higher cost for the building when they are able to sell that. So they see a higher selling price, especially with high-speed rail and Fresno increasingly wanting to move into the technology space. These types of buildings are going to be in demand, where folks want more comfortable spaces. They want renewable energy generation on site, and they don't want to be burdened with large energy costs that come with being in somewhere like the Central Valley, has very hot summer temperatures. And again, if anyone is interested in deploying this system or this process in your communities, you can very easily just replace the word Fresno with the name of your city. And these are the types of benefits that we could anticipate from almost any kind of deployment under this process. Our next steps are, again, as I said, this is a plan. So the next step is the EPIC AEC Phase 2 grant. There's a $14 million competitive grant that's only open to Phase 1 grant recipients. We are still waiting for that to be released, but we're tentatively hoping that that will happen soon, and we can start work, if successful, late 2018 or early 2019. That's it from me, Carrie. I think we can go to questions.
Excellent. Thanks, Neil. I definitely have a question. So maybe you can talk a little bit about, and I think this might be related, useful for other folks that are working in disadvantaged communities, but can you describe like some of the outreach, maybe some of the challenges on that? And then I would say Fresno is probably a unique example in the sense that, I think the population generally is somewhat progressive, but they're kind of in a conservative area in a way. They're kind of, straddling the line of wanting to do, I think if you engage an individual on the street, you talk about energy efficiency and sustainability and the cost savings, they're all open, but then you get the challenge of talking about climate and other issues that they may not be as open or as responsive to. So can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe some of the challenges there in Fresno?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to. Well, one, I just want to start by saying that working with the City of Fresno and Fresno Metro Ministry has been very helpful. Fresno Metro Ministry ran our local TAC meetings where we engaged with stakeholders from developer communities, city, county, Air Resources Board. We tried to get as many different local groups in as possible who could represent their constituents. And we found that those groups were very open to having these discussions. We initially started by not discussing climate change for exactly the reasons that you mentioned, and just going with the benefits that we'll see directly in the community: less air pollution, cost savings, higher home value. But what we found very quickly was folks were very quick to make those connections, especially as the state has big goals and is moving in this direction. People do want to participate, and we found that the more we engaged with groups, we were just very careful to talk about potential and not promise what we were going to do. We made it very clear that this is a plan. We'd love to be able to implement it. And we tried as much as possible to design it to the community's specifications, and that it would, some level of it would be able to work even if we didn't get phase 2 grant funding. And so that's why we're working as much as possible to create resources and tools that are available now and that can help the community, even if we don't go into another phase of implementation.
Excellent. We do have a question here. So does this align or connect with the Transform Fresno effort?
Are you referring to the TCC funding?
Yeah, it's probably it, the Transformative Climate Communities.
So yes and no. We looked at participating in TCC on an individual project basis, so that would be each individual developer could apply to be part of TCC. I do not believe that any participated because the requirements for what would and would not be funded were very strict, and so I don't think we fit the exact criteria. But we do see a tremendous overlap in the intent of TCC and our project, and those are certainly, they're complementary. We think there will be some overlap, but for the most part, they will exist in the same space and strengthen each other.
Excellent. And I know we've talked about this before, but do you want to share a little bit about kind of the component of looking for funding and new, I guess, funding opportunities and the aggregation component a little bit more? You mentioned that on slide 7.
So those are two pieces that work together very well. One would be the aggregation, where we took all of our projects and looked to create capital stacks individually to fund each project, but then we looked at the portfolio as a whole, so that can we leverage a better rate if we have 4 projects participating in this particular loan product, or can we fund this through a bond or a special tax financing district? And that's really what was able to help us get, one, some of the price quotes for things like battery storage, where we're anticipating having one vendor provide all of the batteries, which will provide a significant cost saving, but also allow things like the demand response on that aggregate level. In terms of the funding, we created a funding database, and we've actually started putting that online right now. It's live, but it's a very early stage beta product that really is only applicable if you live and work in Fresno or in the San Joaquin Valley. And what we wanted to do there was find all of the applicable funding sources and create a structured query system, so that if I'm a developer and I'm creating a mixed use residential retail building in infill downtown, I can put all of those criteria into my search function and come back with a list of 10 preliminary financing or funding mechanisms. And for us, what we found was 2 to 3 of those were the financing mechanisms that people used all the time. And so really it was the finding maybe another 3 that may be a good bet that really would allow, that's the difference for us between a project being viable and a project not being viable.
And this might be something maybe explored or not, but it's one question related to, as you do some of these improvements, and you kind of mentioned it briefly on energy efficiency, and the cost of the buildings may go up. Did you explore at all? Is there any way to prevent building owners, from raising their rents, or did you explore the possibility of rents would get raised and get into that? You may have not gotten into that. But I guess going to, the impact on low-income residents, if you do some of these, more advanced projects, what effect does that have on rent?
Yeah, that was something that we kept in mind the whole time. Unfortunately, we're not able to operate as much in the low-income rental space as we would have liked, because what we found was it's difficult, and we're certainly not the first people to find this, but it's very difficult to engage with the landlords, or that's an extra step if we work with a renter who then has to ask their landlord if they can have improvements made to the property. And so when we were looking at that, we certainly were keeping in mind that there would be some kind of provision. And I think this is standard in the affordable housing world, where improvements done to the property are not allowed to result in a rental rate increase for X number of years. So that's something we had in mind, but we weren't, especially we were very interested in getting into affordable, multifamily affordable housing. But again, with the measures that we wanted to introduce, such as smart thermostats, that's quite often you can't install that in multifamily. And so a lot of the bulk of our money and the bulk of where we'd be seeing the self-generation and the energy efficiency would be going to commercial and municipal. And we were not too concerned about the rents being raised on commercial.
We're right up on our time, but I'll take this one last question. I'll just remind everybody to follow up. I'll send a follow-up email with all these slides, links, and resources from both our presenters real quickly. But this is another, I think, important question. Can you describe, the political will in Fresno to get the Energize Fresno project going? Definitely seems to be a government project.
They're very excited. We have been working closely with the city of Fresno from the very beginning. We worked with former Mayor Swearingen. We are working with the current mayor and the current city manager's office, as well as the planning department. So there has been considerable backing for this type of project. And that comes back to one of our initial premises. We have been designing the whole project around their general plan and what they have told us and demonstrated their vision is. So it basically keeps coming down to, we are just providing them with another tool or another opportunity to do what they've already said they want to do. So we found them to be very receptive, fantastic partners, and hopefully the same moving forward.
Excellent. Well, all right, everyone, we're over. We have some feedback there. But once again, thank you, Diane. I think that was really, oh my gosh, we might need somebody to mute themselves. But I'll be brief. Thanks again, Diane, Neil, This is a really great presentation today. I think we had some really great questions. If anybody has any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me or Neil or Diane directly, and they can go ahead and field those questions for you. But I'll send up a follow-up email with a link to the presentations themselves and a recording in case you want to go back and review. But thank you very much. And I'll just remind everybody that I have another webinar, or it's like webinar season for me. I have another webinar tomorrow on performance contracting. I think it's really informative. We have Maria Fields from Jewel Solutions to kind of educate us more about that and pay for performance programs in California in the future. So I will leave it at that. And thanks once again for attending. I'll reach out to you guys soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Please stay in touch.
Will do.